Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. I really hope that you enjoyed last week's video. I spent a ton of time on it, and if you haven't seen that, you should definitely go check it out because it's a really good one. It's a little longer, but it's definitely worth it. Let's get into the video. So today we're talking videography, and more specifically, making handheld videography look more like it's on a gimbal. Gimbals can be super pricey, and most videographers, like myself, are on pretty strict budgets and don't really have that extra $200 to $300 to spend on something like that. And truthfully, I believe there's so much more things that you can do with handheld videos that it doesn't even make sense to get a gimbal in the first place. I really believe that handheld allows for a lot of creativity, so I thought I'd make this video and share with you some different ways on how to make your handheld video look more like it's on a gimbal. So the first tip is probably super obvious, but basically when you're filming, just try and be as still and as slow as possible. Try and be smooth with your movements. Don't jerk or anything like that. Just be very still and stay level with your movement. One thing that you can do on top of this is shooting at a higher FPS rate. So around 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. It can really make that video look a lot better. And we'll look at a couple of examples here in just a second. So now that I've got that basic, pretty obvious one out of the way, let's get into post-production and what you can do after the fact of being smooth with your movements, and now getting into the editing portion. So what we're going to do is go ahead and open Final Cut Pro, and it takes just a second. And I already have a library created for this, so I don't need to go in and do all that. But basically, I have two clips that I want to talk about and just some basic things that I usually do to most of my clips in post. So the first one I want to talk about, we can just watch it all the way through, but it's basically just a smooth pan all the way through, a quick refocus onto the landscape around. This is a shoot I did for a sunglass company, so just a couple of these basic clips. And then the second one, same kind of thing, just of the sunglasses. Pretty simple, pretty obvious, just some smooth panning, slow with the movement, basic stuff. So one thing that you might notice is it might look a little shaky, and that's totally normal. The camera that I use has a built-in 5-axis gimbal, so it's not as touchy and it's not as obvious when you see that camera shake, but it can totally look like that. One thing that I've done is slowing down a clip, and you can do that by going to your timekeeper and going to custom, and easily just typing in 70%. You can slow it down to however much you want. Usually if I'm shooting below 30 frames a second or at 30 frames a second, I try to not go below 50% because then the video might look a little choppy. But if you're shooting at 60 frames a second or 120, anything below 50 usually looks pretty good until you get to around 15 to 20%. Then it looks a little choppy again, but not too bad. So we'll go ahead and should enter in 70. There we go. And we can watch it all the way through again. And you can tell it's just slowed down a little bit. Still looks smooth, basically. But yeah. And then the next thing I do is go to my video inspector, click on that, and don't need these, crops, no, distort, no. So you're gonna see this little button, stabilization, and you can just tap on that. It'll give it a second, but just for video purposes, I'm going to render selection so we can do this a little faster. Okay, so now we can watch this clip with stabilization added and slowed down. Here's what it looks like. And you can kind of see it looks way smoother than it did before. The camera shake is gone. Honestly, I might even change this to like, change this to like 90% or something. I might have even left it at normal speed. But yeah, you can kind of see how the movement looks a lot smoother, basically. You'll easily be able to tell on this next clip. So this next clip, I'm just gonna leave this at the normal speed. I'm not worried about it too much, and we're gonna do the same thing. Add the stabilize button. One thing is some people tend to use stabilization way too much, and I don't think that that's a great thing, because it can warp the edges of your video. So what it's doing is it's finding a point in your video, and basically just trying to keep that point in the middle as best as possible, depending on your movement, because it can kind of detect like if you're panning or if you're like circling. But for the most part, it does a pretty good job. I don't know, I just wouldn't use it for every clip, basically. So here is the next clip. It's all rendered out, and you can kind of see it's kind of bouncing, so you can kind of see it move up and down a little bit. Alright, my camera battery died, but basically you can kind of see it bouncing up and down, and that's something that you don't want. So this clip might have been too shaky, basically. So, and this is again why I say that you shouldn't do it with every single clip, is because stuff like this can happen, where it kind of bounces and it just kind of looks weird. I do have another clip like this. Yeah, this one smoother. We'll just drag that in, add some stabilization, give it a second to render. So basically, while we wait for this, it's just about knowing which clip to use it on. And I'll add a clip here in a second, and you'll see just how weird it can get and how much it can distort your video. But for clips that you are going slow and you're shooting in a higher frames a second, it does look really good, and it really can make your videos look really smooth. So this is done. This might be a little warpy too, actually. I might cut that. So that's not bad. I might end it there and might actually slow this down to 70. Just kind of see what that does. So that looks decent. And if that's just a 2-second clip and like a couple minute long video, it'll still look pretty good. A lot of it is just playing around and seeing if it looks weird or not, but it's a really nice tool to have. When you have those clips that are a little shaky and jerky, it can really kind of fix them. If you're not using it already, definitely start using it. Anyway, the last thing that I wanted to talk about was which type of camera you have. And I mentioned it earlier, but basically a lot of cameras have really nice built-in gimbals. For example, I shoot on the A7 II, and it has a built-in 5-axis gimbal, and I know most Sony cameras actually have a gimbal like that built in. The new GoPros, I just ordered one today and I'm super stoked about it, but the hyper smooth is insane. Some videos that you see of that just look so good. That's basically a digital gimbal. Like, that's stabilization built into the camera, and that's insane. And I love that that's the direction the cameras are going, because it means that we don't have to buy gimbals and we still have the freedom to like do these really creative videos too, without having the gimbal kind of not allow us to do as much. Because with a gimbal, you can turn it and then it kind of freaks out and you can like look down, I guess. It's not as good. You have to be smooth with the controls. With handheld, kind of what you make it, and I think that's really cool. Yeah, basically there's so many different cameras out there to make your video look stabilized and look really good. So keep that in mind when buying your next camera, because like this camera does not have a built-in gimbal. It's also like 7 years old, but it doesn't have one. But it also shouldn't really matter though, you know, like if you're using the tools that Premiere and Final Cut give you, you should be fine. Just kind of be smooth about it and kind of just know what you're doing. Know your settings, know your frames per second, know your shutter speed, just know kind of how you're filming. Kind of think about it before you do it. And I think you'll be fine. With that, thank you guys for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video and I really hope you learned something too. Again, please go watch last week's video. Super stoked about it. So just please go check it out if you have the time. Anyway, thank you again and hope to see you guys in the next video. Later.